your whole body, not up and down or direct side to side. So you really want to think circular and flowing when you're dealing with. Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Pole Dance Rants. I am Vina, owner of StudioVina.com, a website where you can learn to pole dance at home with me. Today I'm talking about static versus spin versus static, but not really. I'm just talking about the differences between static and spinning pole, some of the issues people might have with either one of these, and I'll be talking probably mostly about actual spins, because when I think of static versus spinning pole, the first thing that comes to my mind are what we in pole dance call spins. Because actually, on static, you are spinning around the pole that is on static. It does not move. The pole is static. You, the person, is generating momentum and spinning around the pole. Now, if you're dancing on a spinning pole, then, or some people call them rotating poles, then the pole itself is turning. You're still giving it the momentum for the turn because it doesn't do it on its own, although you could rig it up so it does. But the pole doesn't spin on its own. But once you give it that little bit of momentum, then that's when whatever you're doing is just a pose or a position. You're not doing anything other than holding a position if you're using spinning pole. So for me, I personally find it more challenging and interesting for my pole dance practice because I do dance. I'm not a fan of just doing tricks. So because I do enjoy dancing and expressing the music, I find that using static pole kind of adds an extra challenge so that I have to really think about how do I make this, a movement. How do I make this interesting for people to watch and for myself to do? So to me, static just feels like I can add a little bit more interest to myself as the dancer. Now, a person watching pole dance might prefer spin because there is continuous motion, even if the person's just sitting here like this. There's continuous motion. But I also like the aspect that on static, you can just pause. And that can be very dramatic in and of itself, to be moving and floating and flowing along and then stop on the pole. And you have actually stopped and they're like, oh, she stopped. What's happening next? So one is not better than the other, but that is the challenge that I enjoy with static pole. And that's probably one of the things that some dancers don't like about it is that, you have to kind of get creative and you have to learn how to use your hands, your limbs, your actual whole entire body to change and rotate around the pole while it is static. Now you do have when you're on spin, you do need to understand spatially what's going on with your body because you need to control that spin. If you're on spinning pole and you're just giving it a hard push and hanging on for dear life, that's not going to produce a very desirable outcome other than you might feel like you're going to fly off the pole. Oh my gosh. I remember the first time I tried spinning pole. So the first pole I bought was a Platinum Stages stainless steel permanent mounted pole. We mounted it upstairs on the carpet. We didn't account for the carpet and it did fall down on me. So the only pole I've ever had fall on me was a permanent pole, but that was our fault. So anyway, I had used that pole for the first probably 2-3 months, I'd say. And then I discovered X pole and I ordered one of those. And I got, of course, they had static spin. And so I put it on spin for the first time, did my whole sweeping of the leg, and I thought I was going to fly through the window. I was like, this is insane. How in the world does anybody use this? So I quickly realized that there's finesse. You have to work with that spin. You have to understand both the pole and your body and your body's positioning. So let's talk about that a little bit since I'm on that subject. So, spin pole. There's a lot of studios who will not allow students to use spinning pole until they've learned a certain amount on static. That's totally fine. Especially, you got to watch everybody. But on my website, I allow people to start learning on spin right away if they like, because there's no reason why they can't. I do, however, have them work on strength building techniques on static for the most part before they go on to spin. So usually spin is better introduced in beginner level 1, not my 30-day takeoff program, which is the very first program anyone should take. So with spinning pole, there's a bunch of aspects that you need to think about. You hear questions and see people say, I can't control my spin, or I spin way too fast, I spin way too slow, give me tips. Well, again, this is super general, and it's not something that you can just give 1 or 2 tips about, because there's a lot of factors that go into why you're spinning too fast or too slow or whatever. So let me try and break it down here. When you have a pole in a studio that's tall, we'll say it's over 10 feet, which is common, depending on the diameter, so how round, like how big around it is, if it's thinner, and depending on the style of pole, if it's thinner and it has a lot of like wiggle, you're going to find that it kind of does this wonky thing where it slows down faster than if you have a home pole and it's only, your ceiling is like 7 or 8 feet. That pole is going to feel a lot faster if it's shorter and therefore has less movement, less of that back and forth wiggle. Does that make sense? So this goes for stage poles too. Stage poles is something where people get on them, they're not attached at the top. So it's freestanding on a stage, which means there's a lot of wiggle wobble. So what happens is people get on and they haven't practiced the finesse that they need with their body to control the spin, and they're just kind of throwing themselves around it, and it ends up doing a lot of this wobbling, which of course will kill your spin a lot faster. So one of the keys is to understand what type of pole you're dealing with so that you can adjust how you're entering and maneuvering while you're using that pole. Because if I'm using a spinning pole, for example, Little Minx, they have a spin option, but because of how it's mounted, the spin is not fast at all. So on this pole, you can give a decent amount of swing, of push and swing when you're getting onto it, like say for a climb. You can really extend that leg and give it some effort as you climb up. Now, if you did the exact same thing on an X pole that was mounted by a pole mount instead of the dome, because X poles will spin much faster and smoother if you use a mount instead of the dome that it comes with, because you need less pressure to keep it in place so it spins more freely. But if you did the same action, you are going to fly like crazy. So you have to, the first thing if I go to a new place and I'm going to be using spin pole is I just test to see how spinny is this pole? What am I going to need to adjust in my dancing to do the things that I have planned? So keep that in mind. And again, this is just a general thing because I don't know what kind of pole you have or what kind of poles your studio has. Sometimes people make their own poles, and so they may be more rigid. So if a pole is more rigid and thicker and tall, you're not going to get the same kind of wiggle wobble as you would a thinner pole. So I also have a 38 millimeter brass. I don't have it up right now because it's too tall for my space, but there's also a permanent mount from Platinum Stages. And that pole, even though it was tall, spun really smoothly, but it definitely had a good amount of give to it. So I had to treat that pole differently than my X pole that I had in the bedroom with lower ceilings because I would spin much faster there. So anyway, it's a general thing to keep in mind. Doesn't apply across the board, but if you're like, how come my pole spins so much differently at home than in the studio? That could be why. So let's talk about when you should start. And I mentioned this before, that I let you start pretty much right away. Now, the only time I would suggest that you don't begin working on spin immediately is if you're very, very new to exercise and you haven't built up the strength yet to hold your whole body weight up with your feet off the ground. So like in a pole hold or whatever appropriate grip, not just dangling from your arms. It has to be an actual grip that is used for pole dance, not just dangling from your arms. That does not count as holding your body weight up. At least not for me. You have to know how to engage your shoulders and your back. So once that's established and you realize you can do this, then you can really go ahead and start working on spin, because spinning pole is just holding a pose while the pole spins around. The tricky aspect comes into play when you start to use a transition where you want to go from one trick to another. That changes a lot because you have to be aware of what your body positioning and what your limb positioning is going to do to that spin. Is it going to speed it up? You speed up when you get closer. Is it going to slow it down because you're more open and extended? So those are the two things to remember. You're speeding up when you're close, just like a figure skater. They open really wide and then they turn and spin nice and small. But then to stop, you open back up because you need to slow down. The tricky part, and one of the things I think trip people up, is if you've gone from static and now you're trying to learn the same combination, for example, on spin, in order to keep your pole spinning nice and smooth, you're going to have to move your body differently. And I know I keep saying this, but it's hard to explain. With spin pole, if I'm going to do an invert, I'm going to use a different grip to invert than I would if I were inverting from the ground and coming up. So I would use what I call a push grip or an invert grip. This is going to put me at an angle while I'm spinning. And this is talking about spinning forwards, because that's a whole nother thing with spin pole. You need to understand, are you going to be spinning forwards when you do this trick or backwards? So we're talking about spinning forwards. And you're going to be at an angle already because this is going to help continue the spin as you lift your legs up and come around. Now, when you lift your legs, you are not coming and lifting your legs straight up like this, like in a standing regular invert. You are going to lift your legs at an angle because that's going to keep the pole spinning. One of the biggest keys that I can tell you is when you're on spinning pole, slow down. The faster and jerkier your movements, the more it's going to kill that spin. So imagine flowing through water, dragging your limbs, dragging your arms, dragging your legs, dragging your whole body, not up and down or direct side to side. So you really want to think circular and flowing when you're dealing with spinning pole. And also you want to think big and little, because that will allow you to create big, slow me down, or little, speed me up. Big and little, not up and down, around. If you would like to work on spinning pole, I have a wonderful spinning pole program that helps you acclimate first to spin, and then we go through and understand how to actually maneuver around the pole and do some easy combos. This program is suitable for, I'm going to say, beginner level 3. Don't quote me on that. I'll put it in the description with a link for anyone who's interested in looking into the program. It's free to take a look at. So yes, definitely check out that program if you want to smooth out those spin pole skills and learn how to stop feeling so sick. Because I get it, like spinning pole and I have a love-hate, just because this point in my life right now, I'm not dancing a whole lot, which means when I do pole dance, I'm usually almost kind of starting over and just relying on muscle memory, which somebody who deals with motion sickness from spinning in a circle, I can do roller coasters, no problem, but spinning in a circle is different for my ears. And so I basically feel like I'm starting over from zero every single time. So that's why if you go look at my personal Instagram account, Pole Disco, anything that's current, I don't know that I have really anything that's on spin, because most of the time I'm either teaching or planning and I'm not actually pole dancing. So that's just an interesting fact about me. I do like spin, but I just don't practice enough to acclimate my body to spin. Okay, how about a little static pole talk? If you're listening and you enjoy static pole, drop a comment, because I feel like I'm alone sometimes in this whole static pole thing. Almost everybody I see is on a spinning pole, which is fine. But like I said, there's something about static pole that just allows for a little bit more of a challenge. You know, you can take a pole sit and you can say, all right, I'm going to do a pole sit, but how am I going to make this interesting for myself to do and the person to watch? So you might do a pole sit and you might do something with your arms while you're in the sit and then stop and don't move at all. And then you might use your hands to maneuver your body in a way that allows you to spin down from the sit to the ground. So I feel like that kind of I like that challenge. But one of the key things, if you do want to do static and make it have that spin aspect to it, again, you're going to need to understand how to use your hands, your body weight, and even your limbs to generate that momentum on a static pole. And it is going to be very different than using your limbs on a spinning pole. Because on spin, you want it to be light and gentle and big and flowy and easy. On static, you're more likely to need a bit more aggression to get a spin started so that you're moving around your pole. And by aggression, I don't mean you need to like fling yourself around, but you have to be very intentional about, where you're going. And that's why learning to do controlled momentum inverts are helpful instead of just deadlifting, because controlled momentum inverts allow you to flow up into your invert and not break the flow of the dance by stopping, putting your hips in front, setting up, and then tipping up. So that's why I like the step and sweep, or also called controlled momentum inverts. I'll talk about that more later. I was going to do that one, but I've not had great sleep, so I was like, I'm going to do something else today, because that's going to be a rant for sure. Okay, back to static pole. So if you're trying to maneuver around the pole on static, remember that your hands are helpful. Where they're being placed matters. And this can also trip people up using static too. For example, if they're doing like what a lot of people call wrist sit, I call it a forearm sit because you shouldn't be sitting on your wrist. A wrist sit, you go to lean back, you open up, and all of a sudden you're twisting or turning. Same with your invert. Maybe you get up and all of a sudden you're turning or twisting a direction you did not intend to. It's because of your hand placement and the way that you entered with your body. I cover all of this stuff in my tutorials, so if this is stuff that you're interested in, you can learn it with me. Trust me. It's so much fun to try and manipulate and see how different you can create the movements on the pole just by changing how your hand is first gripping and then how your body is leaning. It's fun. I highly recommend it. So if you're somebody who's just done spin, spin, spin pole, and you're like, static is boring, static's not boring. It's sometimes just a little bit more complex. But on the flip side, you might say, well, spinning pole is more complex because a lot of people have to acclimate themselves to not feel sick. So I don't know. Do you guys have a preference? Like if there was a face-off, static versus spinning pole, who would win? I don't know. All right, guys. One other thing I want to address here, and this can affect both spinning pole and static, but it's grip. Like the grip of your hands. So take static, for example. You're learning the fireman spin, and you understand the mechanics. You know what to do with your body. Your hands are in the right place, but when you go to spin, you just fall like a rock. Well, what's most likely happening is your pole is not warm enough, or your hands are too sweaty, or your hands are too dry or too cold. There's a lot of aspects to look into when you're like, I can't stay up. So one of the first things you want to say, okay, I can't stay up in whatever move it is. What's going on? The first thing to check is my skin tacky? If whatever body part you're trying to hold on to the pole with is not tacky, you're not going to have a good experience. Tackiness, be tacky. Come on, everyone, be tacky. It is the only way to really get that secure grip. Because if you're spinning on a static pole and your hands are way too sweaty, another thing that can happen is you are going to rip the heck out of your palms and your fingers up here. You're going to get blisters and they're going to tear. That's not good because that's too sticky. You want it to just be perfectly tacky. If your hands are too sticky, you need to find a grip aid that is an antiperspirant. Do not just use the grip aid that comes with your pole or that somebody said, this is the best grip aid. You need to see how it is made, like what it's made for, because not every grip aid is right for every situation. So a grip aid, if you have sweaty hands, sweaty skin, if sweat is the reason why you're slipping because it's too wet, then you need an antiperspirant type of grip aid. If you're slipping because you're like me and you're always cold, like it's not that cold outside, but I am freezing. My hands are like icicles. That's just how I am. Thanks, low blood pressure. It's something that then you need to add tackiness. So I will use a mixture. I have a recipe, so you can make this at home too. I use Mighty Grip. I don't have the recipe for Mighty Grip. I wish I did, but I use Mighty Grip powder. But before I put the powder on, because my hands are so dry, the powder alone does nothing. You need a little bit of moisture. So I add my homemade grip aid. It's a spray, very simple ingredients. Spray it on your hands first. Then you add the Mighty Grip powder on top of it. Magic. The grip is fantastic. You can also get things that are extremely sticky, like Kramer's, which will make you stick like a fly on paper, like that sticky paper for flies. Yeah, that's gonna happen. And it's really hard to get off. So I only use Kramer's if I'm performing and I know that the venue is like super cold. So hopefully that helps you guys kind of troubleshoot why, if you're working on static, you're just falling like a rock. Now, of course, it could be that you need more strength. I think usually people will say, you just need to be stronger. That's their first tip, is strengthen your hands, which, yes, that is true. But I know myself, I've been doing this a long time, and if the pole is not right, I can't do a static spin safely. So if I don't have that grip, if my hands are cold, I will be like, whoop, drop like a rock. So before you think you're too weak, make sure that you don't need grip aid. Grip aid's not cheating. Anything you can do to keep yourself safe and enjoy your pole practice is not cheating. People who tell you that grip aid is cheating or that you're robbing yourself of building strength, I don't understand it. Because they use it in competitions. So it's kind of silly. Hold on, I gotta go let my dog out. I'll be right back. So it is not cheating to use grip aids, especially for sweaty people, because if you're somebody who has dry, cold skin, you can probably warm up enough at a certain point that the pole is gonna work great for you. But if you have a sweaty hand issue, I feel for you people because it is frustrating. I absolutely understand why that would be frustrating, because now that I live in Florida and I'm dealing with high humidity, so this space is outside. I pole dance in the elements. It's just screens. So yes, I deal with humidity. So for the first time since living in Minnesota and San Francisco, I'm dealing with a lot of humidity. And it's definitely like when I get sweaty, which I don't normally in my pole practice, now that I get sweaty in the summer, that's terrifying to have sweaty hands. It's not okay to just try and work through it. You need to do something so that you feel safe and secure on the pole. It's not okay to just deal with the sweaty hands. Yeah. So one of the other reasons that you might have problems staying up when you're doing a static spin is you're gripping way too high and you're standing way too close to the pole. I see this all the time. People are like, oh, I just can't hardly even do one momentum, one revolution around the pole. And I see it right away. I'm like, you're standing too damn close, like always. Like my reverse grab, I slam into the pole. That's because you're standing right next to the pole. That's not how you do a static spin. No. To really get the momentum that you need on static, you have to at least have a hip's distance away. That's what I tell people. Start with that. Depending on your limb length, you might need to come a little closer or a little further away if you have very long arms. So remember, when you're going to do your spins, that if you're standing too close, you're going to cut down on the amount of speed you'll be generating. And that's another thing. I teach you both from standing, and then we work on walking into a static spin. Because if you're not walking into your static spin, you are not going to have the same kind of speed or the amount of revolutions, times around the pole, that you would if you walked. So if you're just standing there and sweeping your leg around, that's not going to get you nearly as far as walking into it and sweeping your leg around. You know how you see sometimes people do reverse grab and they do this weird running jumping thing? I don't do that. I don't understand the jumping. But anyway, to each their own. It's fine to do it that way if you like it. But you can still get lots of momentum in a reverse grab on static without the hopping. You just need to walk into it, have your arm in the right position, and understand what you're doing with your hips and your legs. Well, that was my rant about static versus spin pole. I don't feel like there's anything too terribly upsetting to me about static versus spin. But I hope that you found this helpful and that you can kind of now use this to troubleshoot, okay, why am I having these issues with static? Why am I having this issue with spin? Why, when I go to the studio, am I spinning really slowly? Or why am I spinning wildly fast at home? Hopefully these will help you understand what's going on. And of course, if you want guidance on any of these things that I've covered, I have at least more than one tutorial, at least one tutorial for everything that I covered, and probably a program for all of it as well. So make sure that you're strengthening those hands and using grip aid if you need it. Now don't do it if you don't need it, but use it if you need it, all right? I will see you guys later and have a great rest of your day. Year?